It has now been 100 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in Tucson, Arizona. A couple of updates. First of all, you guys remember last week, and I was kind of surprised by this, Sergeant Aaron Cross with the Pima County Sheriff's Office told me that he got word from a detective that Nancy's family initially thought she may have walked away from the house, that's what they were told initially.
100 days. That number sits heavy. It does not move. It does not soften. 100 days since Nancy Guthrie was last seen inside her home in Tucson, Arizona. 100 days since someone walked into her life and took her out of it. 100 days since her family has heard her voice, held her hand, or known whether she is safe. And yet, the answers have not come. That is the part that keeps people up at night. Nancy Guthrie was not a woman who could simply disappear on her own. She was 84 years old. Her back was in tremendous pain. On a good day, she could walk down to the mailbox and come back. Most days, she could not even do that. So when people in those early hours suggested that maybe she had wandered off, that maybe she had simply walked away from her home, her family knew. They knew immediately. Something was deeply, terribly wrong.
She was in tremendous pain. Her back was very bad. She was trying to, on a good day, she could walk down to the mailbox and get the mail, but most days not. So there was no wander off. And the doors were propped open.
Yeah.
And there was blood on the front doorstep. And the Ring camera had been yanked off.
Yeah.
And so we were saying, this is...
Yeah. Do something.
This is not okay.
Yeah.
This isn't... Something is very wrong.
The front doors had been left open. There was blood on the front doorstep. The Ring camera had been yanked clean off the wall. This was not a woman who walked away. This was a woman who was taken. Hi viewers, here is a question for you right now, and it is a simple one. Do you believe the local sheriff's department should have handed this investigation over to the FBI from the very beginning? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments right now. Because that question is at the heart of everything that is about to unfold in this story. And the answer, depending on who you ask, changes everything. Mother's Day just passed. And while families across the country gathered around tables, shared meals, and made memories, Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American television news, posted a video. It was filled with pictures and clips of her mother. Her real mother. The woman behind the public figure. And she wrote words that are almost too painful to read out loud. She said her mother was a daughter, a sister, a nun. She said the family misses her with every single breath. She said they will never stop looking. She said they will never be at peace until Nancy is found. Never. That word carries weight that most people will never fully understand unless they have lived it. And Savannah ended with a plea. A direct, desperate, public plea. She asked anyone at all, who knows something, anything, to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. She reminded people that tips can be made anonymously. That a reward is still available. That someone, somewhere, knows something that could bring her mother home. One tip. That is all it takes.
Hard to believe it's been 100 days. Savannah Guthrie posted a video yesterday with videos and pictures of her mom and wrote, mother, daughter, sister, Noni, we miss you with every breath. We will never stop looking for you. We will never be at peace until we find you. We need help. Someone knows something that can make the difference. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can be anonymous. And the reward remains available. Please keep praying. Bring her home.
But here is where this story takes a turn. Because while Savannah Guthrie is posting that video, while the family is spending Mother's Day in a grief that has no name, there are new developments breaking open in this case. Developments that raise serious questions. Developments that expose cracks in this investigation that should never have existed. A correction was made this week by one of the key law enforcement sources closest to the inside of this case, and that correction matters more than it might seem on the surface. Because it tells us something about what happened in the very first hours after Nancy vanished. And then there is the sheriff. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos was caught on camera just days ago. Someone approached him outside the sheriff's office, caught him almost mid-stride, and asked him point-blank, "Are you any closer to solving this case?" And Sheriff Nanos looked into that camera and said 2 words. "We are." Then he got into his Corvette and drove away. 2 words. Confident. Clean. Final. But here is the problem. The sources who are closest to this investigation, the people on the inside, the ones who have been watching this case from the beginning, are saying something completely different. They are not saying the case is close to being solved. They are saying the opposite. And that gap, that space between what the sheriff said on camera and what the people inside are actually seeing, that gap is where this story lives. 100 days in. A family still searching. A correction that rewrites the early hours of this case. A sheriff making promises that his own people are not backing up. And evidence, or the disturbing lack of it. That has retired FBI veterans shaking their heads. Something went wrong here. Badly wrong. And it may have started on the very first day. Here is what Sergeant Aaron Cross said the first time. He said that detectives had told him Nancy Guthrie's own family initially believed she may have walked away from the house. That was the information he brought forward. That was what he put on record. And at the time, it landed like a stone dropped into still water. Because it contradicted everything that had been said before. It contradicted what Savannah Guthrie herself had said publicly. It contradicted what the family had been telling people from the very beginning. It contradicted the blood on the doorstep, the yanked ring camera, the open doors. It contradicted the evidence. So when Sergeant Cross called back over the weekend with a correction, the correction itself became the story. What he said the detectives actually meant. What they were trying to communicate was not that the family thought Nancy walked off on her own 2 feet. What they meant was that the family initially thought Nancy may have had someone take her away on her own terms. As in, she may have experienced some kind of medical episode. She may have called for help herself. She may have left in an ambulance. That is a very different thing. And yet somehow, in the chaos of the early hours of this investigation, that distinction got lost. It got garbled. It got passed through layers of communication until the original meaning was unrecognizable. And a key law enforcement source ended up going on record with information that had to be walked back days later. Think about what that means. If the people talking about this case publicly cannot keep the basic facts straight, what was happening on the ground inside the actual investigation? If the message being passed from detective to sergeant to the outside world was already distorted, what was the message being passed between detectives themselves? Savannah Guthrie had already answered this question without knowing it. She said her mother was in tremendous pain. She said her mother's back was so bad that walking to the mailbox was a victory on a good day. She said there was no wandering off. She said the doors were open and the ring camera had been yanked from the wall and there was blood on the front step. She said the family was screaming that something was wrong. She said they were told to wait. And now, 100 days later, a correction is being issued about what the family actually believed in those first hours. A correction that, frankly, should never have needed to be made. Because if anyone had simply listened to Savannah Guthrie in those first 24 hours, really listened, none of this would have been confusing at all. But there is something else buried inside this correction. Something that has not been said loudly enough. A separate source, a source who was placed in silhouette, whose voice was altered to protect their identity, someone described as very close to the actual investigation, had already said weeks earlier that detectives were operating under the theory that Nancy did walk off. In those critical first hours. And that source said directly that this false assumption slowed everything down. Slowed everything down. In a missing persons case involving an 84-year-old woman with severe physical limitations and evidence of a struggle at the front door, the investigation was slowed down because of a theory that should have been dismissed within the first hour of arrival on scene. That is not a small mistake. That is the kind of mistake that changes outcomes. And if that staggers you, or hold on. Because what happened inside the walls of that investigation during the first week is somehow even worse.
Over the weekend, I heard from Sergeant Cross, who says that he followed up with the detectives, and he says what they actually meant is that Nancy's family thought she may have had someone take her away on her own. And I asked exactly what that meant, and he said they did not think that she actually walked away on her own, but instead thought maybe she had some kind of medical issue and called an ambulance on her own.
Sergeant Aaron Cross used one word to describe the overall response in those opening days. He did not use the word disorganized. He did not say messy or complicated or difficult. He said chaotic. The detectives themselves told him it was chaotic. They told him they could not even communicate with each other properly. That the coordination between units broke down. That the information was not flowing the way it needed to flow. And sitting just outside of all of that chaos, waiting in hotel rooms, ready to work, were hundreds of FBI agents. Hundreds. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed it publicly. He said the Bureau had hundreds of agents prepared and available to assist with the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Analysts, specialists, evidence response teams, people trained specifically for situations exactly like this one. And they were not deployed. They were not given full access. They were not put to work in the way they should have been. And retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, who has worked some of the most complex cases in this country's recent history, did not mince words when she heard that. She said that having trained agents sitting in a hotel room instead of working a case like this, a case this visible, this urgent, involving a vulnerable elderly woman, is a leadership failure. Full stop. Not a communication breakdown. Not a logistical hiccup. A leadership failure. She explained what a proper FBI response actually looks like. She described pulling up to a scene with nothing around and watching an entire command infrastructure appear almost from nothing. Trucks arriving. Cables being laid. Computers lining up. Antennas going up. Software coming online. She described it as something close to watching a military unit build a landing strip in the middle of nowhere in under 12 hours. Organized. Precise. Unstoppable. That is what was available. That is what was not used. There is a protocol for exactly this kind of situation. It is called Incident Command Systems, ICS, and it exists specifically so that when multiple agencies converge on a single scene, no one is stepping on anyone else. Every agency has a seat at the table. Information flows up through the command structure and back out to each team. Nobody is left guessing. Nobody is wandering around without direction. Nobody ends up at the wrong house. And yet, there is a report that during the first week of the Nancy Guthrie investigation, FBI agents showed up at a neighbor's home and could not immediately be confirmed as real. The sheriff's office launched an investigation into whether these agents were legitimate. They took fingerprints. They were there through the night. And in the end, the agents were confirmed to be exactly who they said they were. Real FBI. Doing their jobs. Being treated like suspects. That is the environment that existed in Pima County during the first week of this investigation. Maureen O'Connell said something about all of this that deserves to be heard clearly. She said that when egos and territorial instincts are allowed to shape the response to a case like this, real people pay the price. She said she has worked alongside agencies who did not want the FBI there. She has been in rooms with people who resented the Bureau's presence. And in every one of those situations, the answer was the same: you leave the ego at the door, you roll up your sleeves, and you work. Because that is what the job demands. That did not happen here. Now there is something that has been quietly building in the background of this case.
President, he told me on the show that he had new information from detectives that Nancy's family first believed that she was a walkaway. And if you look back at that episode, you can tell that it surprised me because it contradicted what Savannah Guthrie said in her interview and what I've heard all along, which was that the family did not think it was a walkaway and that they were frustrated.
Something that got louder when a retired Department of Public Safety lieutenant named Dave Smith gave an interview and said what many people had been thinking but not saying out loud. He said his personal theory is that Mexico was involved. And more than that, he said he believes the possibility of Mexico was deliberately downplayed. Because the moment that international transport becomes a credible theory, the investigation crosses into federal jurisdiction. The FBI does not need an invitation at that point. They have authority. And if there was already resistance to allowing the Bureau into this case, then keeping Mexico off the table would be a way. A very convenient way of keeping the investigation local. That theory deserves to sit for a moment. Because here is what is known about the geography of this case. Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson, Arizona is approximately 45 minutes from the Mexican border. There are 3 documented crossing points within close proximity to her location, and all 3 have camera coverage. There is also believed to be at least one route through that area that does not have camera coverage, though that has not been officially confirmed. Reporters who traveled to the Nogales Crossing, one of the primary entry points, described something striking. Walking into Mexico required almost no interaction at all. There is a small security door. You pass through it. No one stops you. No one asks questions. You simply walk in. Coming back into the United States is an entirely different experience. There are checkpoints. There are questions. There is documentation. But going in, especially if someone did not want to be tracked, the ease of it is unsettling. And if someone had a person concealed in a vehicle, driving in, not walking, there was historically very little scrutiny on that side of the crossing. Maureen O'Connell raised a point that adds another layer to this theory. She said the FBI was already, quietly, working the Mexico angle on their own. She said the Bureau had reached out through their legal attaché office in Mexico, known as the Legate, and had queries running through the border camera systems. Meaning federal agents were already treating this as a viable direction even while local officials were publicly saying Mexico was not believed to be involved. And she raised the question of timing. Whoever took Nancy would not have driven straight to the border. There would have been what investigators call a cooling-off period, a location where they would have waited before making any move toward crossing. Which means the window for capturing that crossing on camera may have been much larger than anyone initially calculated. So why was Mexico dismissed so quickly and so publicly? That is a question that does not yet have a clean answer. And then there is the evidence itself. Or more precisely, the devastating lack of it. 100 days into this investigation, what is publicly known about the physical evidence collected from Nancy Guthrie's home is deeply troubling. The most significant item that has been reported is a single hair. One hair. Without a root. Found at the scene. Maureen O'Connell's response to that was not quiet. She said she refuses to believe that is all they have. She said someone would have to prove it to her directly before she accepted it. She said if she had gone to her supervisor at the FBI and said the only thing recovered from a scene like this, a scene with blood, with signs of a struggle, with a yanked camera and open doors, was one rootless hair and maybe some fingerprints, her supervisor would have looked at her and said they were not going anywhere. Start over. What do you need? Who do you need? Because that is not acceptable. That is not a result. That is a gap. Now a rootless hair is not useless. That needs to be said clearly. Even without a root, forensic scientists can extract mitochondrial DNA from a hair sample. Mitochondrial DNA traces the maternal line. It can narrow identification significantly. It is not the same as a full DNA profile, but it is not nothing either. But here is the other thing that has been raised by people with serious forensic experience. The front doormat, the mat where blood was found, was reportedly still at the scene long after the initial response. The door handles. The doors themselves. The tile around the entrance. These are all items that experienced evidence response professionals say should have been removed and processed. A team with a saw and the right equipment would have taken the mat, the handles, the door, potentially sections of the flooring. That did not happen in the way it should have. And now, Pima County Sheriff Chris NamUs is facing consequences that go beyond the Guthrie case itself. On Tuesday, the Pima County Board of Supervisors held a meeting specifically to address the question of his continued leadership. Several commissioners have openly discussed the possibility of removing him from office. And while removing an elected sheriff is a complicated legal process, there is a specific statute in the Arizona Constitution that may provide a pathway, and it relates to the timeliness of NamUs's responses to questions posed by the board. There are also separate and serious allegations surrounding his work history. Specifically, allegations that Sheriff NamUs misrepresented his disciplinary record from his time at the El Paso Police Department, including alleged suspensions that were not disclosed. These are not minor questions. These go to the character and credibility of the man who made the decision to limit FBI involvement in one of the most high-profile missing persons cases in recent American history. Kash Patel's public comments about this case were, by any historical standard, extraordinary. Retired FBI agents who have been around long enough to remember Waco, long enough to remember the moments when interagency failures became national scandals, those agents are saying they cannot recall a sitting FBI director ever speaking this openly and this critically about a local department's handling of a case. Not like this. Not this directly. Maureen O'Connell said there are only two explanations for why a director speaks that way. Either the case is in far worse shape than the public understands, or the director knows it is not going to end the way anyone hopes, and he is trying to establish on the record that it did not have to go this way. Neither of those explanations is comforting. Neither of those explanations brings Nancy home. 100 days. A family marking Mother's Day without their mother. A correction that exposed the confusion of the very first hours. Hundreds of federal agents who sat waiting while a chaotic local response stumbled through the most critical window of time in any missing persons case. A border 45 minutes away that may or may not have been crossed. A piece of evidence, one single hair, that may be all that stands between answers and silence. And a sheriff who looked into a camera and said two words. We are. Savannah Guthrie is still posting videos. She is still asking. She is still pleading for the one person who knows something to pick up the phone. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips are anonymous. A reward is still available. And somewhere out there, in Tucson, in Arizona, possibly across a border, someone knows something that could change everything. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. And the clock has never stopped running. But here is what is coming next, and this is the part that cannot be skipped. There is new information emerging about the figure captured on surveillance near Nancy's home. The one described as a porch clown in tactical gear. Investigators and independent analysts have been looking more closely at the details of that image, the specific choices made in that outfit, the deliberate nature of it, and what they are finding suggests this was not random. This was not coincidental. Someone made very specific decisions that night. And those decisions may point directly to the kind of person, or persons, who planned this in advance. That story is coming. And once it is told, the way this case looks will never be quite the same.